Okay, welcome to session 6.2, our very last mini lecture for the subject. And today's topic is about strategic leadership and entrepreneurship towards visionary leadership. So what we're going to be talking today is about one of the four functions of management. Actually, you remember we've talked about leadership in your basic management subjects before, and leadership is one of the four functions, and the four functions are planning, leading, organizing, and controlling. We spoke about control yesterday in strategic control, and today we talk about leadership. Again, one of the main functions of a manager. And we'll talk really about how this relates to strategic management. In fact, the real question that we should ask ourselves is, what's the difference between a leader and a strategic leader? So I guess the way we should start is with a definition. And this one comes from Sir John Harvey Jones. And he says, the task of leadership, as well as providing the framework, values, and motivation of people and allocation of financial and other resources, is to set the overall direction which enables choices to be made so that the efforts of the company can be focused. Now, it's kind of a very long definition, but like my style is always to try to simplify things. And the way I would look at this is to sort of divide it into two major parts. And the first part is one that is more short term and basically what leaders do on a day-to-day basis. And I guess the most important there is motivating people, or to try to get people more motivated. And that is basically the essence of what they do. But then the other part of leadership is about the long term, and that is where setting a framework, setting up the values of the organization, setting the overall direction, and making sure that, of course, the efforts are focused on these overall direction. And we can say that the more short-term aspect, of course, is motivation, but it's also about allocating the support, the financial resources, etc., to create or to support that strategy. So again, short-term and long-term. So at this point, let's pause this video and have a discussion, or perhaps if you're watching this on your own, have a reflection on. Based on this definition and what we've just been talking about, what seems to be the difference? And of course, we can say that there's a lot of similarities, but what seems to be the key differences between a strategic leader and a leader? Okay, so pause it. Okay, so I hope you had a fruitful discussion or a fruitful reflection. And hopefully you would have been able to think about strategic leadership is something that is focused more on the long term. So what are we building today to make sure that we are successful 5 to 10 years down the road? So motivating people is, again, more short term, but we really need to think about how do we motivate people 5 years from now, making sure that what we're doing is still relevant, in the long term. So, strategic leadership, the strategic leader really has the following responsibilities, and I don't think this is something surprising to you. The strategic leader is in charge of managing the business for stakeholders. So, all the technical aspects of managing a business, he's supposed to be handling that. Providing direction through the vision and mission or purpose, and even setting that vision, mission, or purpose would be among his biggest responsibilities. He or she needs to formulate the corporate strategies, whether he gets help from this from consultants or gets help from people within the organization to make suggestions. At the end of the day, though, he's responsible for that. He's responsible for approving what the corporate strategies are. Then number 4, he has to monitor and control operations. And we talked about this yesterday, that the leader doesn't look at the nitty-gritties and the details of the day-to-day results, but he looks at, again, annual results or perhaps projections into the future. And they use what we call a balanced scorecard. He doesn't just look at one aspect of the business, but he looks at the 4 aspects of a balanced scorecard. And if you recall, and I hope I remember, the first aspect of the balanced scorecard is, have we satisfied our customer? Right? The second would be, are our employees learning and innovating? Okay. And the third is, here's where I forget. The third is the process. Basically, is our organization using a tried and tested process, or are we in fact improving that process as time goes by, so that basically future employees can use that same process to come up with results? And lastly, of course, are we making money from all of this, or it's the financial aspect. So we ask those 4 questions to determine whether our operations are doing well, today and into the future. And of course, the strategic leader focuses more on, can those questions be answered not just today, but tomorrow and maybe next week and maybe next year. And lastly, his responsibility is to provide policies and guidelines, which really the role of these policies and guidelines is to get people to know what they're supposed to do, even when the leader is not around, even when the leader is not giving instructions. So a little note here that responsibility number 5 is achieved through the organizational structure. So in other words, the leader needs to set up the correct structure for the organization. And that should include the culture, the right kind of organizational culture, but also the structure in terms of how we interact with each other. And this is, again, a subject on its own. There is an organizational structure subject in CIC. We talk about things like whether, as we start the organization, we can begin using a functional structure, where you have a marketing person or a marketing department, a sales department, perhaps an accounting and finance department, research and development department. And then as we grow bigger and bigger, and we need to sort of expand the structure, then we look at a divisional type of structure, where we can divide the organization in terms of the product, or perhaps the clients the type of clients that they service. So, and then of course that can also be a matrix type of organizational structure, where it combines the best of functional and the best of divisional type of structures. So whichever structure that is, the main role of the CEO or the strategic leader is to determine that kind of structure. And when we look at responsibilities 2 and 4, these are dependent on an effective communications network. So what this means is, if the CEO or the strategic leader needs to provide direction, he can't do it. He cannot do it unless he has a very good communications network, and how he conveys his ideas about the vision and the mission and the purpose. And then also number 4, monitoring and controlling operations via the balanced scorecard, of course, are dependent on how well you're able to gather data and information from the operations of the organization. and use that for your decision making. So again, these particular responsibilities depend a lot on how well your communication network is. Okay, Ket De Vries, another expert in leadership, has basically identified two major roles of a strategic leader. And again, these are probably not foreign to you, and they're very, again, very familiar. The first role, major role, is what we call the charismatic role. And again, this is something you take up in the leadership subject. And what we mean by charismatic is a person with charm, right? So the word charismatic comes from charm, a person who is charming, and uses the charm to sort of influence and inspire people. And in fact, some leadership definitions have that word inspire, because that is a major function of a leader. So when they have that charm and that charisma, so to speak, to influence other people, they're able to set direction and vision. And of course, getting the employees to accept that vision and call it their vision as well. And part of that is empowering the employees, giving them the right tools to be able to achieve their jobs. But it also means that you are giving them the confidence to be able to do their jobs. And lastly, it energizes. The charismatic role is about energizing people to be motivated and to achieve their goals and to do their tasks. And that second major role is an architectural role, which is really a building type of role. So, an architect designs a building, but his main role, of course, is to get that structure to be put up. He doesn't do the actual nail hammering, but his role is to make sure that it happens. And that's the same with a strategic leader. And but they're not designing houses or buildings here. What they're doing is they're designing the organization. They're designing what kind of structure it needs, and designing systems that will support the people building that organization. So management control and reward systems come into play. And again, his role is making sure that is a robust system that supports the operations. At the end of the day, what the strategic leader is trying to do is the following. The first is he tries to make sure that the strategies that he comes out with are actually owned by the employees. And what that means is they accept it as something that is it's largely they imbibe, or they basically believe it is the right strategy, and they support it wholeheartedly, like it was a strategy that they themselves came up with. Right. So the best procedures, of course, in creating strategy is to get your people involved in creating them. And that way, they have the ownership over this strategy. Leaders that simply think of the strategy by themselves and simply ask their people to implement it, that is a very one-sided way of doing it. And oftentimes the leader is not successful in getting the strategy implemented, because sometimes the employees or the subordinates don't feel that's their strategy. Okay, so the other thing that they're trying to accomplish here, of course, as mentioned in the balanced scorecard, is that customers are satisfied. Thirdly, we want to make sure people or the employees enjoy the work that they do. And lastly, we want to make sure that things can happen and change very quickly. So outcomes are quick to happen, and we're able to achieve the goals fairly quickly. So that's really what the strategic leader is trying to do according to this diagram. The next is very similar slide, but it really focuses more on what the contribution is, right? So as a person, what is a strategic leader's main contributions to this whole organizational action. The very first and most important is what we call the meta strategy. So you might say, oh, that's a new term. But what the meta strategy really is simply the vision of the company and the purpose of the company. And of course, we know that from there, if we set that vision and the purpose, then the mission comes to play. And the mission is what are the things we're going to be doing to achieve that vision. So those are the two main things that the strategic leader is contributing. And then he gets into strategy creation. And as I mentioned before, the best way to create strategy is to get your subordinates involved in creating them. And you can guide them. But ideally, they should own the strategy, which means that they should be the ones to come up with it. And the leader, of course, puts his inputs in and makes that decision on what strategy to use. Now, you'll note that there is also another contribution, and that is the implementation of the strategy. But frankly speaking, the strategic leader is not too involved in the implementation. The main point, his main involvement in implementation is to monitor, is to make sure he's looking at the results. And it's like a ship captain. He's not steering the ship. He has a person that steers the ship, but he plots the course and he monitors whether we're actually on course or not. And if there's something wrong, then he can step in and give instructions to correct the course if there is a problem. So the implementation part is largely done by subordinates, the executive team, middle managers, and the first line supervisors. Strategy implementation is more their role. But the structure, making sure that the strategy can be implemented properly, the strategic leader needs to set up the right structure. And as indicated here, the ideas, the strategic ideas, he needs to set up. The planning systems, he's make sure that is in place. The way we manage our systems, the way we manage our operations, these are systems that he wants to make sure is in place. The structure and the style of management, which is also incorporates here the culture of the company. So these are all contributions that he has to be able to come out with. And design, actually, a better word for it. Okay, so this is an interesting slide because now we're talking about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. And many of you might be familiar with entrepreneurs, and many people think that aren't entrepreneurs involved in small businesses. But those of you who have taken the entrepreneurship unit here at CIC, you realize that entrepreneurs are more than just small business operators. It's really more of a characteristic. And a characteristic of an entrepreneur is that he is innovative. He takes ownership of the business, even if it's not his business or he doesn't really own it, but he feels like he has a responsibility towards making that business successful. So it's that kind of vibe and that kind of characteristics that make entrepreneurs very strong kinds of people that bigger organizations want. That kind of characteristic, they actually want this to be in their large organization. So this video that we're about to watch is about entrepreneurship. And I'm not going to give what entrepreneurship is all about. Watch this video. And after the video, try to ask yourself, so what does entrepreneurship mean? Is it somehow similar to entrepreneurship? And why do large organizations really want this entrepreneurship characteristic to be woven into their organization. So pause this video, watch that video, and reflect on on the question why entrepreneurship is so important in large organizations. Okay, so we are back, and hopefully your discussion has centered around the fact that entrepreneurship is actually taken from entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship uses the same characteristics of a small business entrepreneur, but using these powers of creativity and innovation and passion, and bringing it into a larger organization. So, one example of this is Tesla, which is a large company, but it's run by an entrepreneur named Elon Musk. And he's brought that entrepreneurship feel into his organizations and made them really very strong innovators in their own businesses. He's not just into electric cars, by the way. Elon Musk is also into spaceships. He's creating rocket ships that can bring astronauts into space. So really mind-boggling kind of operations. But he's bringing his entrepreneurial flair and style into larger organizations. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so as I said, you can argue that a really important contribution of a strategic leader would be to ensure that the culture of the organization is an entrepreneurial type of culture. And companies like Atlassian, which is, by the way, an Australian company who's now operating around the world, they're trying to incorporate this feeling of entrepreneurship in their company. So I want you to watch this video, which is found in folder 6.2 on Moodle. And as you're watching it, try to take note about what are the things they're doing to try to establish this creative, collaborative, and entrepreneurial type of culture within this large organization, Atlassian. Right? Okay, so I hope that after watching that really, actually I really love that video. You can see how different their company culture is. But you'll see what they're trying to do there are basically what Cantor is saying here about having 5 criteria in creating successful entrepreneurial organizations. So he calls it the 5 Fs. And the first F is making sure your company is focused on its core competencies and values. So you can see that Atlassian, despite the fact that it's been so successful, it actually has a very focused competence, and that is developing software for teams to be able to collaborate better. That's what they're good at. And so they don't do, MYOB or Zero or any of those types of software. They don't do the same kinds of software that Microsoft does. They don't want to compete with MS Word or MS PowerPoint or Zoom. They're focused more on again, collaborative software, things that enable teams to collaborate flawlessly in their business. So then they also talked about, in the video, they talked about their own values, and you can see that they're very diverse. They value diversity. They value the points of view of people. They're very flexible. That's the second F. Allowing their employees to search for opportunities within the company, so you don't get stuck in one role. And if you feel you're tired of that role, you're welcome to move on to another role. But also flexible in the sense that, hey, if you want to go home early, you can take care of your kids, or you can bring your dog to work if you wanted to. And that leads to another F, which is friendly. All right. So when you build that culture, you get people more relaxed and feeling like their colleagues are their friends, and they don't, they're not at all shy in offering help, as mentioned in that video. But they stay competitive. They stay very focused on making sure they're ahead of their competitors and delivering applications on timely, and in a they're still very passionate in making sure that they're coming out with outcomes very quickly. And then lastly, they have a very fun atmosphere, which is helps in creating that free and creative type of culture. So if you have fun, and people are allowed to have fun in the workplace, then it breeds more collaborative and creative type of behavior. So hopefully you found all of those F's watching this video. If you didn't, then maybe you can watch that video again and try to find what are the things that they're doing belonging to these 5 F's. Okay, so this is probably the last or the second last slide. And it just talks about one of the things that many visionary leaders forget to do. They forget about the fact that they're mortal. They forget the fact that they're not going to be in that company permanently. And so if you really want to be a strategic and visionary leader, you want to make sure that there is somebody to take over you if you have to leave, or if worst case scenario, if you pass away. So here's a great example from Nikos Morkogiannis. And we watched this video before from session 1.2, where he talks about strategic purpose of Walmart, and Walmart being the biggest retailer in the world, the biggest brick and mortar retailer. So they have more employees than anywhere in the world, and they make tons and tons of money. But really, they started as a small company founded by Sam Walton. And when he started it, he had his own personal vision and mission, which was, he found that getting up in the morning every day, one of the reasons that drove him to do this was the fact that he liked the fact that he was helping his employees. Right? So that was really the values and the purpose of the company. And then when he retired, unfortunately, as mentioned here in this video, something happened. So let's watch that video now and continue the discussion later. So by the way, the video is located in folder 1.2 of your BBMM506 unit, not in 6.2, by the way. So, and when you watch it, don't watch it from the start. You can start at 2 minutes and 50, and then end it at 4 minutes and 30, just to shorten, because I want you to just focus on the Walmart story. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed that video. I'm being a little bit sarcastic. It's just a person who's talking, but nevertheless, it's a very interesting story, and it's hard to imagine that having a purpose like what Sam Walton had was so important for Walmart. So much so that when he retired and he eventually passed away, Walmart lost its way, and they struggled, because they started to treat their employees, not as their colleagues and not as their part of their family, but really just as employees, and that caused a bit of a downfall for Walmart, but eventually caught on. I mean, they eventually improved things, and they tried to return to that value of caring for their employees, and they've continued to grow and become successful. But really, the main point here is what happens when a visionary leader dies. You need to have a plan. So a strategic leader needs to have a plan to make sure that his values, his culture continues on after he leaves, his legacy continues on, and the same plans that hopefully they've developed continue on after he's left. And that's what we call a succession plan. You develop your successor early on and make sure he has the right values for the future. It doesn't have to be, he doesn't have to be, or she doesn't have to be having exactly the same personality or values as the visionary leader, but more importantly, he or she needs to have the right values for the challenges into the future. So it may not necessarily be the same kind of mission, but if the mission changes, then the leader has to be right for that new mission. So a good example of this is in Apple. So Steve Jobs, who is here in the right part of this picture, is one of the founders of Apple. And he was a very driven type of entrepreneur. Again, entrepreneurship comes into play. And it's a very long story, but he's basically had ups and downs. And at one point, he was actually fired from Apple, but they brought him back. And when he came back, he actually turned around Apple. And Apple's fortunes were beginning to decline, but he turned it around, came up with one successful product after another, culminated with the Apple iPhone and the tablet, I forget the name, the iPad, that's it, the iPad. He came from one success to another, to the point where he made Apple the most valuable company in the world. But he knew that it wouldn't last for him because he had cancer. So early on, he knew that he probably wouldn't be able to maintain his role in the organization. But he wanted to make sure that Apple continued on to be successful. So he created this succession plan. And early on, he knew that Tim Cook, which is the person on the left here, would be his successor. And he made sure that Tim Cook, basically was trained well and was involved in the operations even from the early time. And when he finally passed away, Steve Jobs passed away, Tim Cook was ready to take on the role. A lot of cynical business leaders were saying that, Tim Cook is not Steve Jobs. He's not quite as visionary as Steve Jobs. He's not doesn't have the flair and maybe the drive as Steve Jobs. But he proved them wrong, and Tim Cook has gone again to bring Apple from one success to another. It continues to be doing very well, although really they're at the point when they need a new product that to take over iPhone, knowing that the iPhone is now a mature product and it is basically the growth is beginning to slow down. They need another successful, dramatic product. And that's the challenge for Tim Cook. Maybe Tim Cook's role is just to sort of make sure that he focuses on the efficiencies and making sure that Apple really maximizes the iPhone. But then maybe he will step down in the future. We don't know. And maybe they'll find even a more visionary type of leader. But at the end of the day, he's done a great job, and that is largely due to the succession plan set up by Steve Jobs in Apple. Okay, so that is the end for this lecture. Stay tuned. We might have more discussions and perhaps a little bit of a workshop about your assignment. Bye-bye.